This is Buckminster Fuller, or Bucky for short. Born in 1895, Bucky is remembered as an inventor and the architect responsible for the geodesic dome. But he was also a visionary thinker, and in the 1970s published two massive volumes known as Synergetics and Synergetics 2. These books are filled with pictures and equations that describe the geometry of the universe and thinking. Bucky was highly creative in his use of language and grammar, often inventing his own words and run-on sentences. However, I think Synergetics qualifies as a theory of everything, since Bucky claims to have discovered how nature works, how humans think, and how all scientific theories can be unified. These claims have remained largely unexamined for more than 40 years, and again, I think this is because of Bucky's language giving the impression that Synergetics is more of a work of art or poetry instead of a robust scientific theory. This is Robert Fludd. Born in 1574, he worked as a medical doctor, but undertook close studies of philosophy and religion. In 1619, he published his Metaphysical, Physical, and Technical History of the Macro and Microcosmos in two massive volumes. These books are also filled with hundreds of mathematical and symbolic illustrations. Fludd believed in the doctrine known as Prisca Theologia, which asserts that a single true theology exists, which threads through all religions, and which was anciently given by God to man. This view was popular in the Renaissance, but fell out of fashion during the Enlightenment as religion started to lose its appeal. This video is the first in a series of 3 that aims to synthesize the views of Buckminster Fuller and Robert Fludd. I'll be using their pictures to show you the similarities between their theories. In Synergetics, these similarities are known as pattern integrities. They might seem coincidental at first, but have a meaning that goes beyond each particular case. I'll be saying more about this in later videos, but for right now, I just want you to see these patterns for yourself. One last thing, every paragraph in Synergetics has a section number. So if you want to learn more about anything I'm talking about, use the link in the description to view the table of contents online and just find the section number of interest. Okay, a theory of everything must start with the universe. And before the universe, there was nothing. Fludd opens his book by illustrating the void of nothingness that existed before creation, extending in all directions and so on to infinity. Creation begins with light, which carves out a closed sphere of nothing from the void. This separation between an inner volume and its surroundings constitutes the first system. In Synergetics, a system is the first subdivision of the universe, and all systems are polyhedra, with an inner volume and outer surfaces. So think of the concave interior of this sphere as focusing the light inwards, while the convex exterior reflects it away. These are the two fundamental forces known as syntropy and entropy, which are the equivalents of gravity and radiation in Synergetics. So we already have two ways to think about the universe: syntropically into or entropically out of. We're going to continue going inwards first. As the light is focused, new layers of matter are created, each forming its own distinct sphere. Once this process is complete, the universe now consists of a set of 4 concentric circles, one for each element. The 4 elements give us an abstraction, or template of creation. Now, in Synergetics, Bucky depicts the process of thinking as having this exact same structure, 4 concentric spheres. And here is our first example of a pattern integrity. Just like syntropy and entropy, thinking is a process of tuning information inwards and outwards. The lucidly relevant set of information lies between the second and third spheres. This is where the ideas of thought become manifest. Looking at Fludd's template in more detail, he also identifies this space between spheres 2 and 3 as having a nested subsystem known as the sphere of equality. This is kind of the limit of syntropy in Fludd's system, and I'll be coming back to it at the end of the video. But now let's reverse course and start heading outwards. Unlike syntropy, which is compressive like gravity, entropy is expansive and omnidirectional. It carries us outside the universe. In Synergetics, this means tuning in the finite macro irrelevancies on the convex surface. Think of listening to a radio. Just because you've tuned into a particular station doesn't mean that all the other stations are gone, they're just being tuned out. Bucky coined the term omnitopology as a method of rationalizing these entropic omnidirectional ideas. In his first book, 9 Chains to the Moon, Bucky defined rationalization as a time word to replace thinking, which is an ancient, mystically evolved word tentatively signifying an attempt to force the power of God into oneself. So that's exactly what we'll try to do here, by using omnitopology to rationalize what lies outside the universe in Flood's system. This requires consideration of the triangle here at the bottom of the image, which is outside the limits of the template. And from this point on, I will be using the terms triangle and tetrahedron somewhat interchangeably. Synergetics states that dimension may be universally and infinitely altered without altering the symmetrical relationship of the whole system. So, looking at this image here of a triangle between 2 circles, we can easily imagine it as a tetrahedron between 2 spheres. This is precisely how Bucky illustrates the universe and what lies beyond, which in his case is simply the transition from the microdomain of concavity to the macrodomain of convexity. Notice that Flood's diagram goes one step further than Bucky's. The triangle, or Trinitarian dais, is the convex system relative to the universe that we were studying previously, but is also the concave system relative to this new outer sphere, or heaven of the Trinity. So we now have another entropic surface that is reflecting outwards, beyond the Trinitarian dais and its enclosed spherical system. So here's what Flood shows us next, which more closely resembles the pairing of convex and concave tetrahedra in Bucky's image. Flood describes the top triangle as the most divine and beautiful object, showing the fourfold name of God, or tetragrammaton. The lower triangle is merely a shadow of the upper one. In Synergetics, these are known as the positive and negative tetrahedra, which exhibit the principle of complementarity in physics. By chaining these pairs together, Bucky claims that he's discovered the building blocks of all physical phenomena. Gases, liquids, and solids are defined by single, double, and triple bonded tetrahedra, for example. These chains comprise what's known as the pulsative octave wave, and it has a repeating 9-step pattern of generation and corruption. The first 4 steps build the tetrahedron, the last 4 tear it down. But the 9th point, or 0 point, breaks this continuous chain with a momentary nothingness. Bucky tells us that the equilibrium between positive and negative is 0. The vector equilibrium is the true 0 reference of the energetic mathematics. 0 pulsation in the vector equilibrium is the nearest approach we will ever know to eternity and God. The vector equilibrium is a shape defined by 12 spheres packed closely around a central sphere, or nucleus. The nucleus is the 9th step in the pulsative wave, or the 0-phase moment of nothingness that occurs between each pair of tetrahedra. Think of the tetrahedra as occupying particular spheres around the nucleus, like in this picture. Bucky claims that the ability of the vector equilibrium to accommodate octave waves is the closest approximation of God that humanity will ever have. It's how the universe is able to alternate between generation and corruption, or turn gravity into radiation and back again. The introduction of God into Synergetics brings it closer to Flood's system, which already utilizes these 2 conceptions of God. Now, the vector equilibrium is not as obvious in Flood's system, but with a little omnitopology, I think we can identify the pulsative octave wave and the vector equilibrium, effectively combining his conceptions of God with Bucky's. The major clue here is the closest packing of spheres, which, according to omnitopology, represent the omnidirectional domains of points. Now, to see how this works, let's go back to thinking of the universe as a single sphere. Now imagine that it's not only created once, but many times within the expanse of nothingness. We now have a set of identical universal units, which is basically what Leibniz was describing in his monadology. But those monads are windowless and only interact according to pre-established harmony. We're going to try and relate these units together as physical spheres that follow the rules of closest packing. Bucky designed this table to show how conceptuality can be modeled using closest packed spheres. Notice that according to this table, conceptual spheres are not events, but rather relationships between events. He emphasizes that these relationships are built in diamonds, not in squares. And this is a crucial point because we see these exact diamonds in Flood's books, littered with these triangular arrays, often modified with numbers and lines. In my video about Stephen Wolfram's cellular automata, I focused on this particular array, which shows the 4 steps of generation and corruption according to an 8-fold expansion on the tetractys. But now, with omnitopology, these points can be conceptualized omnidirectionally as spheres, like the distribution of created spheres in the void. We can even imagine that the objects of mathematics are the abstract template of the unit, whereas the objects of physics would remain in their material state. Now, with Bucky's formula from that table earlier, we can calculate the number of events being related within this array. The answer is 9 events, which is also the number of steps in a single octave wave. The 9th step, of course, corresponds to the 0-phase vector equilibrium. Take a look at this diagram, where Flood divides the human being into 3 sets of 9 regions. The 9 events are also indicated outside the human being in the realm of the Trinitarian dais, and this 9-fold emanation actually occurs across all levels of the created universe and Flood's system. Now, knowing that the triangular array shows the conceptuality of 9 events, we can arrange these arrays as a repeating chain, both as closest packing spheres and as the positive and negative tetrahedra. Here's the pattern integrity for Bucky's pulsative octave wave in Flood's universe. The vector equilibrium then would be responsible for breaking up these tetrahedral pairs and allowing electromagnetic waves to travel in and out without interfering with each other. According to Bucky, this also explains how the human mind is able to grasp eternal principles of nature, up to and including God. So this all comes together in this image here, which I believe is the closest approximation of the vector equilibrium in Flood's system. First, there is a unit sphere system with concavity and convexity, noted by Flood with these convex triangles labeled outside of all things. Second, there is a pair of tetrahedra arranged in the positive-negative pairing. This is a little difficult to perceive at first, but think of looking at this diagram here from the top down. The tetragrammaton in the center is the top triangle, which is superimposed on the triangle of the Trinitarian dais underneath, just like the shadow of the created world is a reflection of the divine triangle above it. Lastly, we can see Flood has represented the closest packing of spheres in the 3 worlds, elemental, celestial, and the angels, which were each given 9 hierarchical regions from the octave wave. Now the innermost triangle becomes a face of the vector equilibrium, which Bucky shows quite clearly in this illustration here. So this pattern integrity is the closest approximation of God for Bucky and for Flood, since he now combines the tetragrammaton with the Trinitarian dais. At least that's my current hypothesis. Now, I said we'd return to the sphere of equality in the syntropic model. The method of omnitopology we've been using is a way of rationalizing the macro irrelevancies, or tuning into the entropic frequencies. But how does this method occur in Flood's system? Well, we've been connecting the larger sun outside the template to the smaller sun, which occupies the lucidly relevant sphere, and this becomes meaningful in the context of human beings. Here, the smaller sun is at the spiritual heart center, which connects to God as the macro irrelevancy. Rationalization is then conceived as the pairing of the concave human tetrahedron with the convex tetrahedron of God, forming a pulsative octave wave between the two of them. Placing the imagination at the sphere of equality resonates with Bucky's claim that the greatest of all the faculties is the ability of the imagination to formulate conceptually. Which brings us to the ultimate question. Is any of this true? Is this truly how nature works, and truly how humans think? Does Synergetics support the doctrine of Prisca Theologia, the original wisdom given to humanity directly from God? I'll be tackling these questions in my next 2 videos on Bucky and Flood, respectively, as we dig even deeper into the wellspring of their scientific genius. Hi, thanks for watching. I've been working on this content for over a decade now. I'm really excited to be sharing it on this channel. Please leave a comment, I'd love to hear from you, or get in touch with me directly by email. I've added an address to the About section of my channel. There's more content on the way, so stay tuned.